What is up, you guys? Welcome to Word First Radio, the podcast brought to you by Word First Ministries. I am your host, Jacob O'Neill, and as always, I'm joined by my friends Cameron and Bailey.
Hey.
Bailey, pray us in, man.
Of course. Jesus, we know that you are the only true fountain of life. And we just pray that in today's conversation, that would be made clear more so to us, and just that you'd give us wisdom to know how to put that news out to others, to share that news with the world, so that they might hear clearly that you are the only fountain of life, and that we might direct you to them, or direct them to you. Lord, we love you. We trust you, and we give this time to you in your name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. So we are continuing our series called Barriers. Not about people who bury people, but about potential, not to be confused with
we'll do that one later.
Not to be confused with the profession.
That's
barriers. But the noun of potential roadblocks. And
that's right. We were going to call it the more the barrier.
Yeah. We're never going to get this done.
I know, it's okay.
Anyways, so this is, Lord willing, our final installment of our third and final installment of our series, Barriers. We talked about science and God and the perceived conflict there, and we kind of resolved it. We very expertly resolved the problem of evil last week, finally, for all of Christendom. And
That's right. They just needed that one slam dunk from us.
That's right. Yeah.
Leibniz planting Jones, get out of here. We got it.
LeBron James.
That's right.
LeBron James. Word First Radio.
That's right.
LeBron James.
Yes. Thank you for tuning in. So today,
LeBron sponsored this episode, right?
Yes. He's on the Cavaliers now. This episode brought to you by the Cleveland Cavaliers.
This is going way too far.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys.
Go Cavs. Okay, and so this week we're discussing the issue of religious exclusivism, or like religious tolerance. So there's a perception that Christianity as a worldview posits some solutions to mankind's problems that are pretty exclusive.
Yeah.
So you've got some statements from Jesus like, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. He got statements where he's like, if anyone must come after me, he must take up their cross and follow me. And all throughout the Gospels, you have very exclusive statements. And in the Apostles' teaching, Acts 4:12 says, there is no other name given among men under heaven by which we must be saved.
Right.
Those are pretty exclusive statements.
Yeah.
And that rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure.
So let's unpack that, the kind of problem of like, I can't believe in Christianity, or I'm resistant to the gospel because it's like, everyone kind of follows after their truth and they should have the right to do that.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit older, a lot older, very much older than you guys. And I think the first time I heard anything like this, I was in high school, and there was a German exchange student, and she was in another class, but we were friends. And we were talking about God one day, and she said, I just see belief in God as very, very arrogant, as though your beliefs are the right one, and that there's some deity out there who cares about and is paying attention to you. Like, that's sort of the height of pride, which is interesting because Scripture says that we have exactly our problem is pride, and failing to recognize God is sort of the height of our own arrogance. But I think that was the first way that I heard it. That was puzzling to me to hear that problem put that way. And as the years have gone on, I've heard it put several ways. So there's that thing, very arrogant to believe that there's some deity who's looking at you and cares about your life.
Yeah.
Or maybe something like, it's very arrogant to think that you have the claim to salvation, right? The only reason you believe that is because you were born in a certain time and space and place. And if you had been born somewhere else, you'd have a completely different religious view that you'd be convinced was correct. So maybe you're just you're demonstrating some amount of prejudice against other people's beliefs and irrationally preferring your own. Or maybe it comes to us saying something like, nobody can know, like nobody knows. And it looks like there's all religions are basically saying the same thing. And so what we can do is we can throw off the appendages and just take the core of those religions and try and live out the same thing they're all trying to say. Or maybe you'll hear the parable of the elephant.
Oh, gosh.
That's what I was going to ask you to just kill
the
that.
parable of the elephant.
How about you exegete?
Yeah. So how about this? I'll describe the parable of the elephant, and Jacob, you can respond to it.
Sure.
So it's something like you have these have blind people, 3 blind guys, and they're all feeling the body of an elephant. They're all feeling different parts of the body of the elephant. And one of them says, "This thing before me," he feels the trunk of the elephant and describes it thus. I've got a tube that is about this big and whatever. He describes it in those terms. And someone else is feeling the tail. No, that's not what we have. We have a thing that feels like this and has some fluff on the end.
A duster.
A duster.
It's a duster, yeah.
Yeah, I have a duster. And someone else is feeling the ears of the elephant, says, "No, we've got a blanket," or something. We have these big floppity things. And at no point do they appear to be describing the same thing. But if it's because they're blind.
Yeah.
And if they could only see the thing that was in front of them, they'd realize they're all really describing the same thing. They're just describing different aspects of the same reality that's in front of them. What's the problem with that, Jake?
Well, the problem with that is that they're not. They're just wrong.
Yeah.
I think the parable defeats itself in the first sentence of it. Imagine an elephant.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So I think the problem with it is that my dad actually gave me my favorite response to it. They're blind.
They're blind, yeah.
So the problem is that describing an elephant in terms of like, oh, it's just a hose, or it's a big wall, or it's a blanket, those are insufficient explanations of what the thing actually is to where they are actually wrong about it.
Yeah.
These are not merely different perspectives or different interpretations of the same thing. They're just wrong about it.
They're not even different facets of the same thing, right?
Exactly.
What we have is a hose and not another thing.
Yeah.
Right?
You can. We should do this. We could take your 5-year-old to the zoo, right?
Yeah.
And say, "That's an elephant. If I think it's a blanket, am I wrong?" What would Celia say?
Right. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, you're wrong. The 5-year-olds know that, and so I think the problems with the parable is that it gives the game away in the first sentence. It defeats itself immediately.
It's one of those things that sounds wise, but it doesn't withstand a moment of scrutiny. Right? So it sounds wise. We go, no. So what you're trying to say is something like, all faiths are just different facets of the same core truth of existence.
Yeah.
And you go, well, then what do you do with all the stuff Jesus said?
Right.
What do you do with the things that Jacob just said? So what about what Jesus said about himself and what God said about himself? And behold, O Israel, the Lord your Lord is one. And how do you deal with that? And there are claims that are mutually exclusive, right? So if somebody said they're grabbing the elephant's trunk and saying this is a hose, and it's only a hose, and it can't possibly be anything else, that person would still be wrong.
Yeah.
But you would say, okay, you can't be saying that's a facet of the elephant, right? What you're doing is making a claim about the whole show. So there are lots of reasons why that parable fails. It's one of those things that sounds profound, but really is not very deep at all, and so for all of the reasons you said and more.
I have a question that is another putting you on the spot. Okay. This one's for Cam. So, can you describe why objective truth is a defensible reality? Like why non-objective truth, or like the non-existence of objective truth is
just give
foolish.
us the summation of all the work done on epistemology in the last.
Do you want to cannonball into that? Okay. So again, these are sort of categories. People who think about these things and systematize thought, they put in these categories, but most people haven't thought about it in those terms. So we talk about objective truth. That's just to say that there are ways the world really is, and you can grasp them, or you can say true things about them or not true things about them. So to say if something is objectively true, as to say that thing is true, no matter how many people believe or disbelieve that thing. So you might say, maybe you have a cup filled with coins. There's some fact of the matter about the number of coins in that cup, and maybe nobody knows what it is, but there's a number that's true, and all the other numbers about that are false. And we've had, since, call it the sort of postmodern turn, I don't want to take too much time talking about that, because I think that most people that talk about postmodernism have a way too small view of what it is, but it's really kind of like a flavor and impulse against some of the deliverances of modernity and modernism. But we have this idea that the truth is subject dependent, not object dependent. That is, truth is what I make of it. So there are things that are true for you, but not for me. And the truth is, I think we've moved past that culturally. I think we're sort of postmodern now, but that impulse is still kind of alive in the way that we talk. Yeah. So there's the idea that all truth statements really boil down to opinion statements, or the way things seem to me, or that I am the maker of the truth. And it started as kind of in literary terms. So where do we get meaning out of a text? Well, it doesn't come from the author. It comes from the reader. It comes from the observer. And then we applied this to truth everywhere. So the world, as the author, doesn't deliver truth to us. What we do is interpret the world in a certain way, and we create the truth as the observer. So your question was something like, how is it defensible, or how do we defend objective truth? Well, there are a few things. If somebody says, well, truth is different for everybody, you could just ask that person, is that true or false?
Right.
And it's obviously self-defeating. They could say, well, it's neither true nor, it's true for me, but then that's just a world you can't live. That's nonsense. And by the way, nobody lives that way. Right. So when people talk about there's a different set of truths, or what I believe is true for me and what you believe is true for you. People don't, when they put pickles on your burger and you said no pickles, nobody says, well, you were just living your truth. Well, I guess that was true for you, that you got my order right, but it's true for me that you got it wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm just okay. So I'm just okay with that tension. That's like,
yeah.
No. We ask them to make us a burger without pickles, or when someone cuts in front of you in line, right? It's true even for moral claims. Moral claims are where we see this the most obviously. People say, well, there are different opinions about morality, and what's right and wrong for one person, or generally one culture. Like, cultures disagree on what's right and wrong. So what's right and wrong in one culture is not necessarily right and wrong in another culture. I think that's mostly false. And I think you can be wrong about moral claims, but nevertheless, that's marshaled as evidence in favor of the proposition that at least moral claims are sensitive to cultures, or some people take it pretty radically and say they're sensitive to persons only. So every individual subject has their own moral reality that they live with, and therefore you have no right to impose your moral view on me. It's just an opinion. Moral statements can be boiled down to a person saying yay or boo to anything, and that breaks down real fast. Again, you can assert that, but nobody lives that way. Like, we demand justice, and when I've talked to people and asked them to consider really difficult situations, they would just say, they might say, "Yeah, man, I think I really wouldn't want that thing to happen," whatever the thing is. You think about some heinous moral evil that everybody knows is wrong. They go, well, I guess I would say that I wouldn't like it, but I can't say it's wrong in any real way. It's not true that it's wrong. I can just say that I really, really wouldn't like it. And the truth is, man, I think that gives the game away. I think you have, like, the fact that it's not okay with you means a lot, and I think we can have knowledge about moral claims. But then there's the even wider claim, not just morality or moral claims are subject sensitive, but that all of truth is. And when I purport to say something that's true, what I'm doing is now I'm being the author of truth. And remember, the author has no authority in this case. The observer is the one that has the authority to make truth. So I can make a claim, but you have no reason and definitely no obligation to accept that claim as true. And I think that's it's a word salad. It's a lot of you have really smart guys that put really smart sounding language to it, but I think it's just nonsense. Nobody lives that way. These guys have written books about how words don't convey meaning, and you just go, that okay.
They use words to convey that opinion. Apparently,
I guess if that's your project, you really can't blame me if I don't jump on board.
Yeah,
I'll leave that there. I've got a lot to say, especially because you asked such a broad question. But I'll stop, and if we want to talk more about anything I've said, we can.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really good question. I think one of the things that I think about this kind of issue of like truth is subjective, and what's true for me is true for me, what's true for you is true for you. There's an element of truth in certain areas of that. So in one sense, I'll use a very seemingly mundane example, right? I like metal music.
Yeah.
Right. And I like the heavy sound of guitars, and I like the screaming voices of people with beards and big guitar soloists. And so I like heavy metal music, thrash metal, progressive metal. I like metal music.
Yeah.
If Cam, who's a pop star enthusiast, comes to me and says, "You are not allowed to like metal music. You are wrong if you like metal music," there's a point in that where it's just kind of like, well, yeah, I prefer metal music.
Right.
That's what's true for me. What's true for me is that the metal music is better than pop music.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up. I'm sorry, was I interrupting you?
Just a little bit,
Yeah,
but then I'll pass it back to you. And
okay,
so
please continue.
There's an element of like, listen, if you have a vocation that's not sinful that you want to pursue, no one should tell you that you have to be a teacher or a doctor or whatever. Like, do what you want for a living, as long as it's not sinful.
Yeah.
You should listen to the kind of music that you like to listen to. Paint your house the kind of color you want. And there's an element of truth to it.
Yeah.
But I think the whole project, that's different than the whole project of like postmodern thinking,
right,
which has just fallen way off the other side of the horse, which is just like, well, now that has to expand into every area of thinking. So now if there are real moral claims about the world that we disagree with, well, no, your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. If you want to worship Buddha or Krishna or Jesus or Allah, go for it. If you want to have sex with a man or with a woman or with 10 women or get married or get divorced or whatever, like, go for it. That's your personal truth. Your experience is what validates and creates your personal truth.
Yeah.
And that's really how I would phrase it. It's really just a project of taking something that is true about the world, that people's subjective experiences do matter in certain areas, and just falling like way off the other side of the horse.
Yeah. So I perceive at least a couple of problems with that. So it's true that people have opinions, but here's what's important. So we talk about subjective and objective truths. Is when you tell me that you like a certain kind of music. You're really telling me something about yourself. You're not making a claim about the world.
Right.
What you're saying is, here's something that's true about Jacob, namely, I prefer a certain kind of music. And it turns out that is also an objective fact, right? So if I said Jacob's favorite kind of music is show tunes, that would be false. And it can be something in flux. Our favorite kind of music changes, and our tastes and our opinions change, and that's okay. But at a specific moment, if I could say a false thing about Jacob's favorite music, right?
Sure, right.
Nevertheless, not even nevertheless, but at the same time, when you tell me about your taste or your opinion, you're not telling me about a thing outside yourself. You're telling me a true thing about yourself.
Yes,
and so it's a category mistake to say that because there are opinions that are true for me and not for you. What's the best ice cream? What's the What's the best music? Whatever. Because we have disagreements and we're both right, that extends to every type of truth claim. There's obviously no reason to believe the second one because the first one is true, right?
No, I think that's a really good way of putting that, and that's kind of like my point was that's a you call it a category error, and it's really good. I didn't use those words, but that's a really great way of explaining it, that they've taken that thinking and now applied it to every facet of truth. And I definitely want to get your thoughts on anything we've been saying like in that vein, but I also want to kind of pose this question kind of up for discussion. Is it arrogant or intolerant to make truth claims about the world? So to say things like if a politician does something immoral, like to say that is wrong and that politician should not do that, is that arrogant? Is it?
Oh, that's so fun.
Let's think about
it. Just to like kind of add to what you guys were saying before.
Sure.
I just say I think it's obvious where Christians sharing the gospel, like where this becomes a barrier to someone hearing the gospel. I don't know, kind of like you guys were talking about, all of this stuff is like a muddy mess at this point. And it's something like we've been talking about since I've known you guys.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's only in Norway that this is a barrier to the gospel.
Right.
Like the world as a whole is moving more and more towards wanting to be inclusive and suddenly things that don't belong in that category are becoming synonyms of inclusive. Like truth is somehow thrown into that. Like if you say that there's an objective truth, then that is an exclusive action that's like against people, and you're putting people down by making that claim. So like it's just a giant mess and a word salad, if you will.
Oh, I will.
Yeah. So I think that's that's a phenomenon that we all know is happening in the world. And then like even more than that, it's like a high value that society as a whole has. Like it's a very high value that we include everyone, that we have truth. Just all these different things are becoming not just things that people talk about in coffee shops. Like they're becoming values of society that politicians and everyone, it far over. What's the word I'm looking for?
Well, it's saturating. It's becoming the lens by which people view certain issusives. And,
far more than the objective, and like just all these things that they really don't belong in the conversation. Yeah. But inclusivism is.
Well, there's a reason for that. So not everyone is included, right? It's clear and stark who is not included in the group. So I think it's false virtue for certain people to claim about themselves that we're inclusive, because they include only people who believe exactly the way that they do. Which is just so frustrating to hear. But this is why I say that I think we're postmodern. So when we're talking about postmodernism, we're talking about this one very narrow impulse, and that's the impulse to say that what's true for you is different than what's true for me, and they can be true for both of us at the same time, even if they're contradictory things, because truth is an opinion, and it's truth is manufactured by the observer, by the subject. I think we've moved past that. I don't think that culture cares what's true, and we conflate, I think, truth and goodness. So if you ask me, Cam, what's a reason to believe something? So the reason to believe something is because it's true. We want to believe all and only true things, and we want to disbelieve anything that's false. I don't even think that's part of the project anymore. I think, like you say, so the thing where I said the subject determines or creates the truth, it's gone a step further than that, which is we say things like, you live your truth. Look at him, he's living his truth. Right. Which is to say, we've become so narcissistic and so like we just made ourselves God to the extent that we get to define the whole universe for everybody else. And when we decide what's true, the first question we ask is it good? Right? So is the certain truth claim. We say, well, that's not good. That doesn't fit. Call it the moral opinion of the people in my in-group. That doesn't fit that moral opinion, so we're going to reject that. And you say, is it true? And they go, well, even claiming something is true is a power bid. And that's, who did you say, who was talking? They were telling Michael Brown and Frank Turek that their truth claims were coming from a position of whiteness.
Oh, I don't remember their names, but that's a debate.
Coming from a position of whiteness, and therefore it's false.
I heard the other day there's a progressive pastor. He's not a pastor. He just teaches satanic stuff, named Brandon Robertson. You got to repent, Brandon. But he was commenting on a Christian TikToker who was living in homosexuality for 30 years, and he made a video saying, the word he used was, I'm an ex-gay, and I met Jesus, and he changed my life, and I love Jesus. And Brandon Robertson comes on, and he's like, here's the thing, ex-gays don't exist. What he actually is just confused in his sexuality or suppressing who he is. Right. And I thought about it, I'm like, what? Brandon Robertson is a bigot. Is completely intolerant.
That's not tolerant and inclusive.
Why don't this guy who's like, live your truth is like, you didn't let this guy live his truth. No. You're like, no, he's just wrong about who he is. And he actually isn't ex-gay. Right. He's just a gay man pretending he's not. Right. I'm like, what a bigot, like,
there's Beckett Cook. I won't spend a lot of time talking about Beckett, but he's awesome. Check out his YouTube channel. And he'll tell you about the lifestyle he lived. And then he sort of came out as, I am saved by God, and I'm persuaded that homosexual relationships are sinful, so I'm not going to do them anymore. And his life collapsed. All of his friends that he'd had for decades, they all abandoned him. He was not allowed in the club. He was not allowed to live his truth. So there's this false inclusivity that is so offensive because it's not inclusive. And what I appreciate is when we talk about tolerance, and again, tolerance has even evolved. So where we had sort of the postmodern impulse to say that the truth is subject sensitive, and now we don't even care about truth. Like the truth isn't even out there. We're nihilistic. It's not even a thing to be looked for or grasped. And when someone tells you that it is, that's an oppressive power bid. So too has our view of tolerance. So when I was in graduate school, we had this sort of new tolerance, which wasn't really tolerant of anything. Tolerance meant you had to accept all the things I say and believe, and even that's evolved. But the idea is, I don't know, if I say that I tolerate something, first of all, it means I think it's dead wrong. I disagree with you, but I value you enough as a human that we can cohabitate the planet together. We can even love each other and have significant relationship with one another. But I tolerate this belief you have that I disagree with. And tolerance, inclusivity is not that at all. It's decidedly intolerant of anybody who's outside what I think is really a narrow and obviously absurd and insane position. But if you accept that, then you're in. And everyone else is out. And so it's hard for me to see certain people, and I guess that's not even what we care to talk about. This isn't a commentary necessarily on that on that thing. But it doesn't help us now as we intend to preach the gospel, because we have a culture that is hostile to anybody making truth claims at all. So I think a generation ago, it was there's what's true for you and then there's what's true for me. And now even to say, no, there's a truth that you're not apprehending, that itself is seen as an oppressive and an act of domineering that is offensive because it's bad, not because it's true or false. That doesn't even matter yet. It's you are attempting to dominate me, and that is immoral, and that's intolerable.
Yeah. So let's pick up on that after
really quick, like the you tag the term like false virtue to everything you just described, and I think like that makes sense of it perfectly for me. And yeah, it just like it's a false virtue that society has put forth, and it becomes like a competition more than anything. And then do you want to go back to the question that you posed earlier?
I would like to, because that kind of just fits really nicely with the thing that you said. So making truth claims, we kind of talked a little bit about the self-defeating nature of just this whole idea. So making truth claims is unavoidable. And you have people that I really kind of like the way you described it, as like we've moved past the whole tolerance project of your truth is your truth. Now it's this power struggle, like power bid of like, of not inclusivity, but let people like agree with our ideas. But kind of speaking to that, is it arrogant to make truth claims?
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if it's arrogant, right? And arrogance is an attitude. Arrogance is so making a truth claim is morally neutral. Arrogance is the posture of my heart when I make a truth claim. So can you make a truth claim arrogantly? Sure. Right? There's a wonderful Paul Simon lyric. He says, you don't have to lie to me, but there's no tenderness beneath your honesty. I think that's it. But what he's saying is, you don't have to be mean. You don't have to lie. Like, tell me the truth, but be nice about it. So is the posture of my heart arrogant? Yeah, but I think to apply that to the making of truth claims itself, like, is telling the truth an arrogant activity? Well, of course not. It's not inherently arrogant or not. What's arrogant is me as I deliver the truth claim.
So my thinking behind this question before we talk about it, I feel like you're about to say something. So just real quick, my thinking behind this question is like I hear a lot of like when people make truth claims, or like a really big debate right now is like the gender debate and like what is a woman, right? And from the other side of that debate, if you people who think that gender is on a spectrum and it's fluid are just like, well, you're being arrogant, you're oppressing me, and imputing on me like this kind of like standard when I have my truth and you're making a truth claim, and that's intolerant and arrogant, and it's morally wrong to do that.
Well, that's the exact phenomenon that I'm talking about. Where whether or not something's true doesn't matter. It's not even close to the first consideration. The first consideration is a moral one, and it's immoral for you to try and dominate me. So what you're doing is attempting to oppress me by making the truth claim in the first place. And there's more to it. There's there's this house of cards of nonsense underneath when we get right there. And the point was not to talk about all of that philosophical theorizing that's on the bottom of all of this, but it does illustrate that exact point, right? When you say, "No, I disagree with you about the nature of gender," and what you'll be met with is something like people saying, "I've seen this, I don't know how many times," is that you are denying my right to exist.
Yes.
You're denying my right to exist. And what someone like me will say, who's still thinking of truth in different terms, would go, "I'm not denying your right to exist. I'm just telling you that there's a fact we disagree about. Can we talk about that?"
Never in our disagreement did I bring up the point of data that you do not exist.
Right. I'm not even telling you that you're not allowed to have, like, I'm not talking about any of that. Like, how did this get personal? Well, because it's personal before it's true or false. And so when I make a truth claim, I'm doing something to your person, and according to the ethic of people who think this way, what you're doing is the worst kind of injustice to me, and I'm virtuous by resisting and stamping it out. So it makes it impossible to even really talk about the truth that's out there in the world. Now, thankfully, again, nobody can live this way consistently. That's not right. We still have a problem when someone cuts in front of us in line, and we don't say, "Well, I guess he's just living his truth." We recognize that there's something wrong with that, and I think that there are even in those terms there's a way to find common ground and talk about what's important to us. And the ideas are so insane and so obviously false and so self-defeating that hopefully there's a way forward for us to like just talk about the real world the way that it is. But we're at a place where there is academic is too generous a word. There's intellectual cover for plugging our ears and going, and not allowing any other ideas in, because we say that ideas that aren't in, right? So there's the stuff we're tolerant of, but it turns out to be a very narrow window of opinion. It's a very small piece of paper that you could write the allowable, acceptable opinion upon. Anything outside of that is an immoral attack on my existence, and I'm virtuous and righteous to stand up against it. What that does is it gives you intellectual cover to never have to consider somebody else's opinion and never even have to think about what's true in the world. You only have to look inside. And you have, Vodi Bakum talks about this new kind of Gnosticism. I think he calls it
That's good.
He calls it racial Gnosticism or ethnic Gnosticism. But the idea is only I can see my lived experience, and I can tell you what's true, and you can't tell me what's true.
Why don't you pick it up from there?
I don't know. I guess I would just react to what you just said. Like, that's obviously the arrogant thing. Like, if you're asking,
that's the
what's
arrogant thing, right?
Yeah.
I agree with Cam. The saying true things isn't inherently arrogant. You can say them with an intent of arrogance. So that depends on your heart and everything as the words come out of your mouth. But just I don't know how to like build a foundation for it, but just that's so obviously the arrogant thing to my ears. Like you say, you can't even speak to the subject because that would be you oppressing me or something like that. Like that's arrogance.
I can tell you what's true, but you can't tell me what's true.
Right.
You proclaiming to have truth is arrogance. So listen to me and I'll tell you what's true.
Remember, this was before we met you, but you'll love to hear about it. In the early days of the young adults group at the church we came from called Rise, I'm not going to name any names or the topic, but
okay, let's see if I can remember then.
There's a guy there who had some very controversial views that were racist, and he came to talk to me, like brought documentation to prove me wrong and talk to me. And somewhere in the conversation, I just buckled down and was just like, I just think you're wrong. Like, I just don't look at the world that way, and I think your facts are wrong. And he got like really offended. He was like, "No, that's you. I can't handle somebody telling." This was his exact words. "I can't handle someone telling me that they think I'm wrong." I'm like, "Well, do you think I'm wrong?" He's like, "You are wrong." And I was like, "Yeah, there you go." So I can't say you're wrong, but you can say that I'm wrong. And he's like, "Well, you are wrong." And I was like, "Okay." So the point is it was just I love that. I think that. To your point, Bailey, it's just that that sense of like, that's the arrogant thing. The arrogant thing is to not respectfully disagree and instead dogmatically assert as truth which is something you don't even believe in, which is just this wish-washy, subjective thing. And I think we really got to the core of where like this objection to the gospel comes from. Is this kind of like, well, it's exclusive. I'm an inclusive person, which is, how many counterexamples do we have of the people who preach that they're not inclusive? My mom actually, years ago, I don't remember when this happened, but years ago when the Women's March was a thing in D.C., and she was like, I was reading an article that feminist but pro-life women's groups were not allowed to participate in the part. And I'm like, oh wow, tolerant, inclusive, and pro-choice, except when people are pro-life.
Right.
And it was so fascinating to me.
I think the way it works down to like gospel conversations is, I think, more practically. So, there's that just pile of nonsense that is real, and we have to learn how to handle with care and love and grace, and you have to. I think I'm convinced you have to be programmed to operate that way because it's so unintuitive and so like we don't. Humans don't like operating with contradictions, and you have to train yourself to do it. So you kind of are programmed against being able to discern truth, which is really satanic, ingenious, and horrifying. But I think the way that it works its way into normal conversations is what we were talking about earlier with the elephant. It's like, religions all teach basically the same thing. So, I know that you guys think you're right, but really, I mean, this is how it goes with me with Norwegians. I say, well, what's important to you? Like, what are your values? I live my life to serve Jesus. How do you live yours? And they go, that's fine for you, but I just want to be like a good person and do charity and help people and love the people around me and all the stuff that we would all say is really, really good. And most of them will follow it up with, or at least have the belief in their mind somewhere that this is what religion is getting at anyways. What all of these religious traditions are trying to do is just teach you how to be good. Like, even if you want to be bad, be a good person who cares for people instead of hurting them, and on and on and on. So they have a problem with Christian exclusivity because what we're saying is like, we're another flavor of ice cream, but we're the only one. And they go, well, no, there are lots of others. And just because you have a taste for this particular flavor doesn't mean that everybody has to. And I think we'd be right to bring up the things that Jacob has to say. Like, Jesus says that there's an eternity apart from God if you don't find the narrow path. There's a really wide path, and what it leads to is destruction. Find the narrow path and follow Jesus down it. And if you don't, destruction is the worst conceivable thing. And I think there's debate about about the nature of hell and existence without God and what exactly it is. But I think we should at least take Jesus seriously when he tells us over and over again. He talks about hell a lot. And he just says, do anything to avoid it. Do anything to avoid it. Do anything to avoid hell. We've talked about this on the podcast. If it means gouging your eyes out, gouge your eyes out. If it means cutting your hands off, cut your hands off. It's better to be maimed and blind and in the presence of God than it is to have your hands and your eyeballs and be separated from him for eternity.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts to expand on that? Or?
Well, you can deny this if you want to, but I kind of want to tee you up for like something we've talked about a lot. Which is the question of like, is Jesus arrogant in saying or in claiming that he's God, or if Jesus decided to say like, I'm awesome, everyone should follow me, I'm super wise, I'm the coolest guy. Like, if Jesus just talked highly of himself, is he arrogant for doing that? And are Christians arrogant to say the things Jesus said, share their beliefs?
Was it Muhammad Ali who said, it ain't bragging if it's true?
Well, that's the principle, right? Yeah. And so this is something I talk about a lot, because I think it's a really worthy subject to talk about God's greatness and glory and how he deserves it. And so an objection to Christianity that we hear a lot that is kind of along the same lines of what we're talking about is, God wants me to worship him and no one else and devote my mind, will, and emotion to his will. And that makes God a narcissist who is just concerned about making slaves for himself and to worship him. And that is a misunderstanding of what pride is and what narcissism is. So pride can be summed up. I like the way that you sum it up. I don't really usually use these words, but I will, and cite Bailey Fagan as my source. Pride can be summed up as having an incorrect view of yourself. So part of my story and my sin struggle is a struggle with pride. And I incorrectly tried to correct that thinking too highly of myself by thinking lowly of myself all the time, by thinking that, you know what, I am not worthy to press record on the camera at church, or you know what, I'm not worthy, and I'm dirt, and I'm horrible, and all that stuff, and would think really lowly of myself. And people, when I share this with them, have talked to me like, you know, I used to think the same thing, and I used to have a really low sense of self-worth. And what I found out was that's just another form of pride.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, why is that a form of pride? I'm thinking that I'm horrible and I'm as low as dirt. And the reason that's another form of pride is because the focus and the spotlight is still on yourself.
It's still posted to the universe in terms of you.
Yeah. And so the relevance to your question is that, does it make God arrogant to ask for all of the glory and honor and praise and authority? And the answer is no, because he deserves it. So if pride is thinking incorrectly about yourself, for God to ask for all of the glory and honor and authority in the world, it is rightly and correctly his place to receive all of that.
Yeah.
So when I get this objection that like, God only wants me to worship him, and I'm like, yeah, because he's the greatest thing in all of the universe and all of existence that deserves all of the worship.
Well, and God displays humility, which is crazy to me, and makes an example of it. So he condescends to come to humanity and to save us when we have done all of the problem making, and he's done nothing but been holy and perfect and just and good the whole time. But he does more than that. He delegates authority to us. Right. He gives us an earth and tells us what to do with it.
Be fruitful, multiply, and rule over the earth.
Yes. And he makes us in his image so we can relate to God Almighty. He didn't have to do that. We're not worms, right? We get to commune with God. That's crazy. Jesus tells us over and over and over again, right? If you want to be first, you have to put yourself last. And blessed are the humble, and blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacemakers. Then he, on the night before he was betrayed, he washes his disciples' feet. Right? And they have a big problem with that. Peter freaks out, has a big fat problem, going, "Why are you washing my feet? This can't be. No, it's I need to wash yours." And Jesus rebukes him, calls him Satan, tells him,
if you do not let me wash your feet, you will have no place with me.
You have no place with me in my kingdom. He goes, "Oh, then wash my whole body."
Yes, right.
You're not getting it. But then I think we miss this. He washes the feet of Judas, knowing that Judas is going to betray him. So, and then he takes the debt and punishment of all humanity on himself. We did 100% of the murdering, and he took 100% of the punishment himself, so that we could live in relationship with him to do what? To rule and reign with Christ in heaven forever. So even in the kingdom, he delegates authority and gives us a place as children of the King to rule and reign. It says that he's built many mansions for us. He showers blessings upon us. So even God, I guess you could say that he's arrogant to demand that we don't worship anything else. But he's the rightful recipient of all worship. The rest, it's like telling my wife that she can't make voodoo dolls and be in love with them and leave, or something. It's like, no. I'm husband. I get that devotion is meant for me, and my devotion will be meant for you, and not for the things that I invent to take your place.
Well, so imagine this. Imagine after all of that, after God doing all of that in humility, imagine the arrogance on our part to say to him, "No, I want another way to heaven. I think my ideas, all religions are true." And so
I'm going to keep being a good person.
And so kind of along the same lines, that's what the arrogance is. The arrogance is to look at what God has done in humility and to garner glory for himself. And the arrogance is to puff our chest, stomp our foot in the ground and say, "No, I want another way. I want to make my own way.
I want another way that is me doing what I want to do anyways."
Did I answer your question?
Because I've never killed anybody, and at least I'm not Hitler. So I want another way, and that other way is take me where I'm at, straight into your presence. And I think again, we just severely overestimate our own virtue. We talked before about the atonement, about how God takes our debt, how Jesus took our rightful penalty, and we used the metaphor of a murderer. And the only person who can take your penalty is somebody who's never murdered before, and how we demand justice for that murderer. And that's just exactly your point, Jacob. Like, he's done that. He's taken all of that, and we say, no. I thank you, Judge. Thank you, Jesus, or whatever, for offering to do that. I don't want you to do that. I want to take all the punishment myself, but also I want none of the punishment because I haven't murdered anyone else, just that one guy. You know what? Okay, but how about it's arrogant of you.
Yeah.
It's arrogant of you to even want to take my punishment on yourself. It's so backwards. And again, it's zooming way too close to the problem. Back up, get some context, and see the actual and like add to the world true things about the world, including your own unrighteousness and the actuality of what's happening. And let's take a sober look at what's actually going on. To say you're arrogant for being exclusive. Yeah, I mean, I guess so. But it's the same kind of exclusivity where I say, look, 1 and 1 is 2 and not 3. And there's an infinity of numbers that 1 plus 1 does not equal. And I'm excluding all of those. And that's not an act of arrogance. It certainly isn't a bid for me to oppress you. It's not a power bid. We're just talking about the world the way that it is. And if that's what's true, if there's one way, then I'm gonna tell you that one way. Yeah. And it's inappropriate and it stops the conversation. And that's the point of it. The point of it is to stop my conversation because no one wants to bend a knee. Scripture, I mean, that's the thrust of Scripture. No one wants to bend a knee and submit to God and live life the way that He's told us. We want to live life the way we told us. So we want another way. No, God, I don't want that way. I want the way that keeps me exactly where I am.
Right.
I want to follow myself to heaven. And what does Jesus say? That is the path to destruction.
And think of how arrogant and backwards it is to, what was I going to say? Like, what's not going on is God is the oppressor who is suppressing our personal truth and is like, no, you need to bend a knee or like turn or burn.
Right.
What's happening, and the way that I usually, to get real practical in evangelism conversations, the way that I have put it, that people hopefully understand if I've read it correctly, is that, listen, God has given you every good gift in your life. God has taken care of you and sustained you in everything in life that you enjoy. That even like the ones that you take for granted, like laughter or like or music, good music, tasting good food, is provided to you and is made possible by the God of the universe. He has done all of these things to woo you to Him, to be like, I am the ultimate end. I am the greatest thing that could exist, and I'm offering myself to you to have a right relationship with you. And it's so backwards to perceive that as, well, God, you're just suppressing my truth. He's like, no. I want to cure you of your corrupted heart. Right. I want to cure you of your corrupted heart and have a right relationship with you so that all of the things you enjoy in this physical, temporary world, you get to enjoy with me for eternity. Yeah. That's the correct way to look at it. Yeah. And what's not going on is when we're preaching the gospel is that, no. We're some exclusive cult, some intolerant like worldview that doesn't. Well, the point can just never be recruiting members, right? We're never drafting for membership into our club, right? That's not the point. The point is not we want you to wear the shirt with our logo on it. It's not like sports teams or whatever, or like political parties even. That's not what we are ever doing. What we want to do is offer you what has been given to us, and that is the cure to death and relationship with the God who made you. So, of course, there's the benefit of not being separated from God for eternity, but there's the way greater benefit of being in His presence and among His people, and to be re-related to God and to one another in an unbroken universe. That's what we're inviting people into. But it seems to be a simple kind of I don't know. So it seems to be like we want you to be the fan of the right team, or something like that. And you see how hateful people get when they go to a sporting event and there are rivalries, right? Like people beat each other up.
over that stuff. And that's what it feels like. I think sometimes we're having these conversations. Is I'm comfortable on my team. I don't want to be on your team. I like wearing this color shirt, and that just is never, ever what we're doing. And it's hard to get outside of that when we're talking sometimes.
Yeah, and then I'd like to distill down a lot of like what you guys said in like smaller format, like for God or for the Christian pointing to God. To show like God's awesomeness or his glory. Like if God has a planet in the sky and like if that was me and I had a planet and I was like, check out my planet, obviously that's me being arrogant and showing off. But for God doing the same thing, like God showing off is an act of mercy towards us because of the right and true thing, which is that we're bound for hell because of our own situation that we've thrust ourselves into with sin. And apart from Jesus and our faith in him saving us, we're doomed to that. So God showing off, or God doing anything, is an act of mercy towards humankind. And then I also wanted to emphasize just that the like this barrier of the idea that like to make an exclusive or a truth claim is oppressive or just that whole thing. That's just a lie. That is the enemy and humanity. That's a lie that we've all contributed to, that ultimately is trying to keep the two pillars of like Jesus as the exclusive way to salvation and faith in him as the thing that actually earns us or saves us, grants us that salvation. That lie is like geniusly crafted by humankind who hates God and wants to nothing more than to run from him and rebel from him, and of the enemy to keep us from those two truths. And like, just when we're in a gospel conversation, that's what we like have to be almost obsessed with as we're explaining these things. So like all these things are like really fun to talk about. Like is Jesus arrogant for saying he's awesome?
Yeah.
I would love to like tell that to a non-Christian all day, but if I tell that to them all day, they're not going to get closer to the gospel.
Oh yeah, definitely
like,
have to be
keep
strategic.
Yeah.
It's a good Bible study point, and it's something I have used in Bible studies. But you're right. When it comes down to the gospel, like I think that really just gets at the core of it all. So I thank you for that. I think that's about a good place to land it.
Yeah.
I think we addressed a lot of stuff, and I think that ultimately, to kind of just harken back to something you just said, it really is evil genius that God would reveal with clarity by becoming a human being what his way is, what his truth is, which is just objective truth. All truth is God's truth, as it's been said. And to show his way, it really is evil genius to just be like, well, instead of convincing them that that's nonsense, I'm just going to, that the enemy would come in and that humankind would get together and say, what if nonsense couldn't be a thing? What if truth couldn't be a thing at all? And so therefore, like, if you look at the world through that lens, like the whole thing just like falls apart. But the truth is that there is objective truth out there, that God became a human being to reveal it to us. So is Christianity intolerant? Well, God is intolerant of corrupted hearts, and God came to purify them and change them. That's the best thing for us. That's the best thing for the unbeliever we're evangelizing to. Right. That's the thing that gives us the best good and brings glory to him. And so I hope you enjoyed this conversation of addressing some of those underlying presuppositions and the way the world thinks, and hopefully getting a Christian response to that there is objective truth out there. Jesus comes to reveal the objective truth, and the objective truth is not an oppressive tool used by God. It actually sets us free from sin and opens our eyes to see the true God that created the world, who loves us. So I hope this was a benefit to you, and I can't wait to see you again next week. God bless.
Thank you for watching this episode of Word First Radio. If you like the podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to learn more about Word First and how you can support the ministry spiritually and financially, check out the links in the description below. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Word First Radio, and we'll see you again next week. God bless.